I'm just going to pause the live stream when we're in breakouts, and it looks like we are working. Awesome.
The group notes and variety of other places. It's objects and concerns cluster matrix or something like that. And you might find that it's actually easier to work within that outside of Kiko to have a whole new window for it. So I'm going to assume that everybody's fairly Zoom and Kiko savvy at this point, and I'll go ahead and get started. As a little, a little exercise, I thought we would do some annotation because I have fun with the annotation. So if you haven't done it yet, if you go to the little green thing with Zoom, you can choose annotate, and you can see that there's a little annotate button or a little annotate pencil that you can click, and then that'll bring up a toolbar that you can actually draw on my screen. And I've got 4 types of research artifacts: data, software, samples, and semantic things, ontologies, vocabularies, etc. And then 3 general roles, whether you create these things, whether you create or sustain them, where you fund yet, you're all getting it. Show what you do. And by fund and support, that doesn't necessarily mean you're a funding agency. That could mean you're like the PI on projects. Interpret it as you see fit. So I'll give you, a minute or so to play around and click where you are. Wow, we got a lot of people working in the sample space. Nobody funds software though. Oh, somebody does. So, and can someone take a screenshot of this and maybe throw it in the notes? Do I hear a volunteer? I can try and do it.
I've got it.
I got it.
Okay.
great.
Thanks, Alexis.
Thanks. So we cover the gamut. That's good. And because what I'm getting at here is that there's a variety of different things that are produced by research, and there's a variety of different roles in conducting research. And we want to think about how we can appropriately credit those different roles for those different types of artifacts. So I am now going to move on. Oh, somebody does everything. Okay, last chance for a screenshot. I'm now moving on. And I think I can clear everything, right? Isn't it advanced?
You can. I think I can also clear everything.
There, I cleared it all. But I can't advance.
It might still be on Zoom rather than on the app itself, the window.
Yeah, I thought it was, but I can't change either. All right, here we go. So a bit of background. So the Research Artifact Citation Cluster, well, actually, ECIT developed data citation guidelines more than a decade ago, and we updated them fairly recently. And so there is a citation to those guidelines. We have also developed guidelines for citation of software and services, and there is a citation to them. And I would argue that the basic issues of data and software citation, particularly data citation, are resolved, but there's a variety of issues that remain. And I'll just give a little plug to a paper that I wrote with Ruth and Matt Jones that sort of summarizes the current state of play and where we might be going in the future. But so the things that remain, the issues that remain really stem from the definition or the intent of citation. And we've been using this definition of data citation from CODATA, or CODATA ICSD task group back in 2013 that wrote a really extensive report on the current state of practice, policy, and technology for the citation of data. I commend it to you, even though it's 7 years old, I think it's still quite relevant. And so they say that data citation is a reference to data for the purpose of credit attribution and the facilitation of access to the data. So we're really bundling a number of concerns into data citation, at least 3: reference, credit, and access. And so then what we've been trying to work through in citation cluster is how does this apply to what we're calling research artifacts, other research artifacts. We used to call them research objects, but that has meaning in certain communities. So we're using the term research artifacts. And there is a taxonomy of contributor roles that was developed, I don't know, about a decade ago, that has been adopted by a number of journals for articles. And it has these, however many, 12-ish different roles that are involved in developing a paper. And some journals actually require you to specify the role that each author played in the production of the paper. And so what we want to do today is, well, all right, more background. I think I have my slides out of order. So as I mentioned, the cluster is trying to take a step back and consider the broader issue of addressing all these different concerns embedded in citation for different types of research artifacts. And we've identified 32 different types of research artifacts and then began to separate these different concerns that citation tries to address. As I mentioned, reference, credit, reproducibility, impact, tracking provenance, et cetera. And we've clustered those 32 different artifacts into 9 general categories and began to consider these different concerns or different use cases, if you will. And at the winter meeting, we assessed the reproducibility use case and asked the question of when do different research objects need to be identified to ensure reproducibility or validity of a result. And in this session, we want to address the credit use case. What roles should be credited where for different research objects? And so that's where I should have then gone to this, the taxonomy, the credit roles taxonomy. So today, our goal is to identify whether the roles of credit, the contributor roles taxonomy, apply to other research objects and where they should be captured. How do we capture that credit? And so we have 5 clusters of artifacts. Those numbers come from the spreadsheet. So as I continue, you might start thinking about, we're going to go into breakout groups of those 5 different categories. So you might want to think about where you want to go and put the number before your name. Change your Zoom name and put the number before your name. So let's see like how Sarah has done. She's for Sarah Ramdeen. So if others could do that, that would be great. And then what we're going to do is each team will walk through their items and then consider where you would actually credit a particular role for a particular artifact. And we're giving you 4 options for where the role could be recorded. And don't worry about the order, don't think about author order or anything like that, the primacy of the role. Just think about where it would be credited. So would it be in a citation, as in sort of like an author type role? Would it be in something akin to the acknowledgements? Maybe that's on a landing page. It's a fairly high level metadata, maybe a related paper, et cetera. Or is it credited somewhere else? Maybe it's deep in the metadata or even in the data itself or, in the comments within the software or, somewhere more obscure. And then finally, maybe it's not applicable at all. Maybe the rule does not apply or doesn't need to be credited or what have you. So here's the basic process. And this is also spelled out in the notes document for this session in the Kiko chat. The Google Doc. And I ask you to record everything in the credit tab. There's 4 tabs in this spreadsheet, and there's one that's called credit or something like that. It's the second tab. And then, so we're going to break out into these 4 groups, and we're going to have a fair amount of time. But I think we're going to have pretty big groups because we have currently 36 participants. So we're going to have close to 10 people in each group. So I think it's important that we have some time to work independently and quietly for a little bit. So for step 1, just give the leader, and the leaders have been briefed on this, so they'll walk you through this. But just take a few minutes, look at the artifacts in your grouping, check to see if you agree with the definition of each artifact, just a simple yes or no. and then start to review the roles and how they apply to the different artifacts. You might want to take notes on paper or on a separate document or something. Then after the silent period, the group will just have a quick vote on whether each definition is okay. If there's a good consensus that they're okay, just go for it. Otherwise, try and come to an agreement on a new definition, but don't spend a whole lot of time on definitions because we really want to start getting into the roles. And then just walk through each artifact, determine where each role belongs in those 4 categories that I mentioned before: citation, acknowledgements, elsewhere, or not applicable. And I would recommend that for each artifact, maybe take a couple minutes for everyone to just quietly enter their opinion in the matrix and then discuss, so sort of alternate between quiet time and discussion time. And then before you wrap up, consider what your key messages are, or what the takeaways that you want to present to the broader group. You're not going to walk through, all the roles for each artifact. We won't have time to do that. But, the key messages that you want to get across.
So, Mark,
yeah.
I note that that Ted just posted a new link to the credit ontology now, which has been ontologized and has a lot more terms. And I guess the question is, are we using the old one or the new one?
Well, I grabbed the ones off the credit webpage.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
think that the one that Ted provided is an extension. I don't know that it is the extension, and it seems like
Right.
it's actually very hard to read as well. So I would suggest we just use the existing 14-term human readable, relatively straightforward one.
Okay.
Yeah, Ruth is right. It was done as a separate ontology rather than an extension, but there are some fairly clear crosswalks, but it does have a much broader
roles.
range of roles. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for flagging that. I think that's something that the cluster can look at in the future. But for now, let's stick with the 14 human readable ones, as Dan said.
So
Well, Dan just doesn't think OWL is human readable. That's his problem.
For
Mark-
my group, I was willing to put up Protege with the thing loaded in it so that we could actually see the definitions. But
Mark, can you show the breakout slide again?
Oh, sorry.
Yep, perfect. And we have just about everybody sorted. Mike just joined us. But so far the group sizes, just so people know, Mark's group with data has 11 people in it. Dan's group with software has 3 people. Physical artifacts with Sarah has 7. Semantics with Ruth has 7, and instruments has 4.
So if any of you data people might want to think about going to instruments or software,
Yep.
I'm not going to force the issue, but we'll give a second.
You change your number, I can move you. And I think Mike, Mickey, Peter, Fran, I will get you into group 7.
And so while people are doing that, are there any other questions? I'm just catching up with the chat.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that each of these breakouts, there is a link for Google Doc notes, and people can put notes there too.
The other thing is, if you get into a breakout and you decide you want to change breakouts, there's just a come back to the main room where the leave button normally is, and you can come back and I'll move you somewhere else. Or you can put that, that's probably the easiest way, just come back and I will reshare, or I'll resend you wherever you want to go. So Mark, are you?
I'm getting a server connection issue to the credit links in the notes document. That's the problem.
Oh, what?
So the casray.org/credit or whatever it is not working?
Not for me. Not for me. Just maybe somebody, can someone else check, make sure it's universal or if it's just me?
I haven't been able, I was trying the hour before this session started, I wasn't able to get access to it, but I found a few journal articles that have lists of the terms and definitions, I'm not positive that they're an exact match or complete.
No, this looks good. So there's this one for the, is this the link you, yeah, the one
Yeah.
to sell press?
Yeah, and I've got a few other journals I can pop in as well if it's useful.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's good to have the definitions because I think people will want the definitions.
Yeah, that's why I was trying to open the link.
Yeah. Okay. So can you put that new link in there, Sarah? The cell press link.
And we have a call-in user. I'm gonna unmute that person and see. Well, no, I'm not seeing them on the list. Oh, here. So we have somebody that's calling in from the phone. We're just heading into breakouts.
Oh, okay. This is Don Collins from NCEI, and I was just able to join. I had something that overlapped. So
Yeah. Hey, John. So
you're heading into breakout.
I can put you in a breakout too. So if you can tell me where you'd like to go, if you, and actually, I could open these up, Mark, and then I can move Don if you want to do that so that we don't.
Okay. And will you time us? Will you put a timer and
Yep. How long do you want to go?
What does it say in the
I
note
think
stuff?
it
I don't have that.
said, look, I'm looking, I have it.
22, I have it from 2:20 to
3 o'clock. So
3
40
40.
minutes.
Yeah, and maybe,
Okay.
just I don't know, a 4-minute warning or something, when it's going to start to yank us out.
Yep, so I can only go up to a 2-minute warning, but so I've got
Okay.
you for 38
fine.
minutes and a 2-minute warning. And that sounds good. So ready to go. And then I'll get the folks who I haven't gotten into a breakout, I'll get you there in just a second.
Okay. Any last questions from anybody before we're all whisked off? Okay, great. Well, let's get to work, and I will see you all in about 40 minutes.
Okay, and come back here if you need anything, if you need any help. So I will see you guys in a bit. Okay, so John, Danny, Mike, and
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, this is Don. I'm not really sure where I want to be at this point. I'm looking at let's see, data, software, physical artifacts, semantics, and instruments. Those are the choices.
Those are the choices. Yep.
Okay.
Don, it looks like somebody just requested you to go into software or physical citations.
Physical artifacts. Was it Heather?
Sure.
It was Heather.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
that's
roll the
fine.
dice.
Put me in software.
Okay, and
Please.
John, remember when you get there, *6 to unmute and *9 to raise your hand, just so that so you can talk. Yep. And I'm gonna.
Okay.
Thanks so much for working with us on this. Okay,
Sure,
so
no
you're
problem.
going to
This is
software.
the first time this has worked. So.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna put you in
Okay.
software.
Robert, can you?
Okay, Danny, Mike, where do you want to go?
Aaron's sitting next to me.
I could either do software. What were the other choices? Now I lost my, hold on.
And between data and semantics, I'm looking right now.
Robert, can you refresh our charge?
Mike, I would go semantics if I was
Okay,
you.
sounds good.
Okay.
Look at how everybody's so easy.
Now it's just you.
I know. I just lost my chat, that credit thing, to see where I think, I could really use software, but I didn't see who else was in there.
It's Jessica, Dan Katz, and Julia Collins.
And now Dawn.
And now Dawn.
Sorry. Where's my Kiko chat? Why am I so disheveled?
Disheveled.
Software. So everything just rebooted when I was trying to get on.
Are we all back, Aaron? Okay. So I will give a quick briefing on where we got with data. If you all want to, well, here I can share my screen, but if you all want to look at the matrix, you can see where we got. Sharing screen. So we spent a fair amount on definitions. The definitions that were there before were the definitions that were written for the reproducibility use case. And the reproducibility use case and the credit use case are really quite different. The reproducibility use case, you really need to know a specific thing to be able to, that was applied to be able to do reproducibility. With credit, it's much more subjective and much, because we're dealing with humans and how we recognize that. We didn't change the data collection level definition. We did change the granule definition. Service products, we changed, basically said it's the same thing as a granule or several granules. We changed the images, video, and audio, whereas for reproducibility, we said it was basically the same as data, but in here, it's a particular representation. And I think that's important. Peter pointed this out because there's often intellectual work that goes into representing data, in some clever visualization, say. And then model outputs didn't even have a definition because I don't think we got to it last time. And we just said that to distinguish between model outputs and anything that might be, is that
Hey, Mark.
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt. There's just a request in the chat though to make the text a little bit bigger. If you can zoom a little bit.
Is that better?
Perfect. Yep. Yeah.
So for model outputs, we said it's the result of executing a simulation. And it's important to make a distinction here between where you might generate a product through a modeling process, like you might apply an algorithm to a remote sensing stream that interprets the different bandwidths or something, but that is still based on an observation, whether it was an observation of, microwaves emitting from the planet, say, even though that was then, gone through some sort of algorithm to generate, soil moisture or something like that. Whereas
Hey,
this
Mark.
is a straight simulation. Yeah, Ted.
Oops. Yeah, I mean, what's the difference between simulation and a model? You've got model outputs, and it seems to me the definition would be just as good as products produced as a result of executing a model. It seems a little circular.
Yeah, the only point is that this is simulated as opposed to derived from observations. That's all we're getting at. That's the only.
Well, a lot of models have observations that go in. I would say executing a calculation or an algorithm.
Yeah, well, we're trying to make the distinction between a calculation and a simulation. And it's fuzzy again. And we just, so this, this is why we spent too much time on definitions. And I think what a key takeaway, I think, is the definition has impact on how you credit things. And it's also important to recognize that these definitions are working definitions simply for the purpose of this use case. They're not the end all and be all of definitions. So we spent a lot of time on definitions, as you saw in that little discussion was maybe why. And then we started walking through the different roles for a data set at a collection level. And it's important to recognize that the credit taxonomy was created for articles. And so this is really a test to see if these roles apply to these other artifacts. And as we went through it, the definitions that how they work in an article are maybe slightly different than how they work for a data set. I won't go through what, so we didn't get very far. We got about halfway through for one artifact. But what was encouraging is that we did have pretty good consensus on the different on whether a role should be credited and where for the different for data collections. The big thing is it's often a question of sort of degree of effort. Like, so if you look at the formal analysis, that could be, or the data curation, we spell it out a bit more there, that if it's minor curation, maybe that's acknowledged pretty deep in the thing. If they made significant changes, maybe it's they have sort of an editorial role that needs to be recognized in the citation. The repository also deserves some level of credit here, but that's captured as the repository in the citation, not as the author. So the takeaway there is that this is just a working document. If this exercise does turn out to be useful, and we write up any sort of recommendations or anything, we're obviously going to have to get into more. So that's our little summary. And I took too long, but did I miss anything major, group 2? Okay, then let's go to software. Dan.
Right. Yeah. So we started off with definitions. We had definitions for the first 3 things: software, software service, software workflows, that we didn't make any changes to. We added something that you could almost call a definition for models and for visualization tool web application, but in some ways they're really more notes that could eventually get turned into a definition. They're not very formal yet. But they're hopefully enough to kind of indicate what we're thinking about. And I guess one of the points with those is we had a little bit of disagreement about what a model is and if it's really different than software or if it is just software. And we decided that it is kind of software, but it also includes some other things, potentially algorithms, input data, maybe other input models. And also kind of decided that the people that talk about models typically are not programmers or software engineers, and they're typically scientists. And part of the reason that we have a different term is it's different people trying to highlight what they're doing in a way that makes sense to them. So this probably needs a little more work still to figure out exactly what this means, but in any case, visualization tool web application, we decided was really basically the same as a software service, but just with a different API, with a human API as opposed to a machine readable API potentially. But and then we started going across the columns and started with conceptualization. And as we were doing this, we realized that most of what we were thinking for one kind of object was the same for all the kinds of objects. So once we filled in something, we just copied it all the way down. So conceptualization made sense for everything. Data curation didn't make sense for any of the objects, except maybe it made sense for models. So that was the only thing where there was a kind of a difference with one kind of object versus another. And then we just went across and we did 6 out of the 14. Unfortunately, we also ran out of time. I think the only other thing that I would say is that we also had some issues related to the fact that credit was developed in the context of papers, which made some of these things not make sense. And the other thing is that some roles are extremely unlikely to happen in isolation without a complementary role also happening from the same person. And so that was also a little confusing and led to a bunch of discussion. Like, is there really somebody that only does funding acquisition, but they don't do project administration or supervision as well? So we tried to think about if there was somebody that only did this, how would we acknowledge them? But it just isn't a very realistic case in most of the time. So that's a quicker version of software.
Great, thanks. What's next? Samples?
Hi. So it's interesting. The sample group, I feel like we had some of the same issues where we started off with a too long of a discussion on the definitions because we felt that the definition for physical sample wasn't adequate, that it had some conflicts within it, and just there needed to be a little bit more division. And so what we suggested, and I'm not seeing it in this example, I thought I changed it, was oh, sorry, could you move to the other tab, the ROs and responsibilities?
Which tab?
The very first tab.
Oh, you were working in the wrong tab.
No, we worked in both. We've
Oh,
got some, we were suggesting though, for this idea of, for physical samples, that perhaps specimen might need to be separated out from samples, that there were a few different characteristics of them that made it hard for there to be a single definition. But that's still something that might need to be discussed in more detail. And then also the idea of cards or labels for samples might also be something that might need to be an object. So, but we've got a comment on the original base term of physical sample that if you hover over it, you can see the comment. Let me find in my notes.
Semantics of the definition is not well phrased.
Yeah, and just that. Yeah, so there it needs to be discussed, and we felt like that we had some problems with that at first, but we felt that the examples were fine, just that maybe this concept of what a sample is needs to be a bit more articulated. But part of that then influenced, if you go back to the credits tab of the spreadsheet, we also, which it sounded like the first group had a problem with, these roles didn't fit well with the activities associated with managing samples. So we had discussions about what's the difference between conceptualization and methodology when you're determining where to go get the samples from. What about the sampling technique for collecting the samples? Where does that go under? And how do you show that that might be different from designing the field study? We had discussions about the curation of it and the stewardship of it, and how that didn't quite fit in with some of the different roles as well. Supervision versus curation, which is the best job when someone is managing it within a repository, versus, let's say I go out and I take a subset from that repository and now I have a subset that I'm managing. Where do I report those things? So our main recommendation from this was that there might need to be either a different flavor of definitions for these created for physical samples, or perhaps new fields added. Like we felt like collector was an essential term related to samples that isn't really well represented by any of these terms. And then there might be others, again, getting back to that repository aspect and the curator, which is not the same as data curation. And so we had trouble with these roles. Then to get back to where the credit should be shown up for samples, there was discussion about putting it in the acknowledgements, particularly the original repository where the sample was looked at, or perhaps where it was subsampled from, and then a citation for the subsample itself, as similar to like a data citation. There's also concern that maybe you need to specify the type of object or the material for the object in the citation. With lab notebooks, we had discussions about those being similar to more of an unpublished paper, and we felt the citation was the appropriate place for that. But there was also questions about what about credit for transcription, which could affect interpretation. And also things like logbooks, where it belongs to the ship and not necessarily an individual, and so authorship can get complicated if many people are part of that capturing of information. And with labels, that fell into that elsewhere category, where maybe you're looking at a label and you need to refer back to it because there's inconsistency in the naming between what's on the sample, what's on the label, what's in the publication. So you need to reference the label as well. And that would probably go somewhere into the deeper in the data and that elsewhere. But overall, it was a good discussion, and we just felt like those credit roles just needed more work to fit this community.
Great, thanks. Semantic things. Oh, you only have one object. Okay.
We may only have one object, and we did not have the kind of definitional discussion because we just used any kind of semantic resource along the semantic ladder, from glossaries all the way up to formal ontologies. So we did have frequent questions about use of the terms conceptualization, data curation, etc., because they were often being interpreted differently by different people, and we eventually had to just acknowledge that what we were talking about is this for the thing itself. So wherever it said publication, we put, basically thing. And what we did was we started off by having everybody go through the whole set of columns. So we have things in all of the sets of columns, but in many of the columns there were multiple opinions, and so if we think about things like conceptualization, is this conceptualization of the idea of you know, a whole ontology about some particular topic? Is this conceptualization about 3 terms that are missing from some area of a bigger ontology? Or is this a conceptualization of a study of the terminology in field X to see how it varies across regions and etc.? Because we have a little bit of all of that here. So we ended up taking a lot of notes in our in the Google Doc that Rama created. So it was good you created those, Rama, because we have a lot of notes in there. And we only got to we didn't get very far. Go back a little. I think we only talked about the first 4 of these. Yeah, obviously. And yeah, okay, so we sort of have agreement of the first 4, sort of. Though, and so there's a lot of work left to be done.
Okay, great, thanks.
Can I ask a question before we move on?
Sure.
There was some discussion around modeling that I wonder if modeling and ontologies are more similar than modeling is similar to software, and certainly considered a kind of model. And
it can be.
We need a concept or idea class that might tie those 3 things together.
I think you're going to have a very hard time convincing modelers that they're ontologies.
No, but an ontology is sort of a model. And this is sort of, I don't know if you saw Alexis's point in the chat that not all models are simulation models. You know, sometimes they're theoretical models, but then also that, you know, an ontology is sort of a model of a knowledge space.
I think here when we're using models, we're really talking more like models of various Earth systems.
Right.
Which is, I mean, I agree that ontologies are knowledge models, but most people, when they're talking about models in the context like this, are talking about climate models or process models or something like that, where you're using math to try to model some Earth system.
Well, I would argue at the high end of ontologies, they could do that, but I don't want to go there because ontologies have a whole spectrum, and we were considering that whole spectrum all the way from, you know, controlled vocabulary lists to taxonomies to glossaries, all the way up to formal ontologies, and I would like to keep that together.
I think the examples given in the ontologies here do not really go into models. They're more about words and what they mean and how they relate to each other. Whereas models are mathematical things that produce some output results.
Well, I think
we should, I mean, this is a long discussion, but I mean, certainly like ontologies like Envo, you can run it, you can reason on it. There's formal logics, which is, you know, kind of deduction. You can write proofs. But again, it's a blurred line when you get to the top of that semantic ladder. But as Ruth said, it's good to keep them all together for the moment because they have similar citation patterns. And I think that's the key at this moment, like to focus on the citation patterns. We can get the rest is another conversation.
Yeah, and maybe just to wrap up that I think Jonathan's point of, you know, so definitions are obviously really critical, and particularly in the context of understanding what you're crediting. And so we almost need an ontology of all of this and how it all fits together and how all these pieces work together is sort of my initial takeaway.
The thing that struck me with the model discussion is this definition is different from software because the models are written by scientists. Well, maybe that's where the ontology and modeling has more in common than we previously thought, because they're the subject matter domain experts, ideas about the real life thing. There's also this weird kind of theoretical model that doesn't even fit under any of these categories. So, and it's not an ontology, but we often cite Darwin for, the concept of natural selection. So how do we cite him in this framework?
I'm going to leave that question out there because I don't think we have a good ready answer, because I do want to get on to our last group.
So actually, I do want to make just one quick comment. Is that a concept sense isn't actually a digital object, so I'm not sure it fits here at all. Right. I mean, this is a research object citation group, so everything here has been put into some kind of an object. If it's a book, if it's a paper, if it's an algorithm, if it's something. So I guess in some sense the concept isn't an object until it gets instantiated as some kind of an object, and then we worry about what kind of an object it is, I would say.
Yeah, it's not the concepts though. It's what's the modeling of the concepts?
But a model that isn't instantiated as a concept. Sorry, I'll stop.
So just I was going to, hey Dan, just go back to Gruber's original definition. Ontology, the shortest, most frustrating definition, or any other type of conceptualization, is an ontology is a specification of a conceptualization. And until you specify the conceptualization in English language, any other computational form, any W3 syntax, then it still is indeed a concept. As soon as you specify it, it is an object, absolutely. Yeah, do you agree?
Yes, I do agree. Once you do that and put some formality on it, you can digitize it, be that a mind map even, or to a thesaurus, to an ontology.
On the topic of models, since it's a highly general concept, and as is the corresponding term, consider possibility of a taxonomy of models. So the different things that were mentioned today in terms of mathematical models, Earth system models, and things like that, you can actually use those as qualifying elements for the general category of model. So you can create, let's say, a taxonomy of, let's say, computational models as opposed to mathematical models, as opposed to conceptual model, which is a burgeoning field, actually, conceptual modeling, and how that is distinct from ontological modeling. So that is one approach that we can take.
Okay, we're uncovering all sorts of complexity. Instrument facility people, Rama.
Yes. So we spent a fair amount of time on definitions and arguing about facilities are buildings and organizations like NCAR or NASA Goddard and so on, whereas probably we should be talking about platforms here, and also distinguishing between platforms and instruments. So we did some editing of the text there, but didn't spend a lot of time focusing on the definitions matter, just like somebody else was saying for another one. Definitions matter only the point of does the crediting change? The idea of credits for different roles change if we change the definitions. So it's possible that we'll have to call out one more row here, like platforms, but we didn't go there. And we spent a fair amount of time, most of our time was spent on the filling out most of the columns here. And where columns are having blank, I think our opinion was /not applicable was what should go there. But where things we felt needed credit, we included the places where the credit should be placed. like 1 or 2 implies, well, they match the definitions of 1, 2, 3, 4 that we had in the instructions.
One added note is our group had similar issues with the roles applying to the type of artifact we were discussing.
Yes, great point. Manufacturing was not included, for example. You know, instrument manufacturer is a role. That's a very important role that's not covered by the roles in the credit stuff.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. This was interesting. And this was very much an experiment. And so, you know, clearly one of the takeaways is the open question of whether credit is appropriate for these other types of artifacts. And so what I'd like to ask is a final question maybe, and if you go to the participants thing with Zoom, you can indicate yes or no. Let me think about how I want to phrase this. Is it worth further pursuing this exercise with the credit taxonomy, or should we abandon the taxonomy? That's not a yes or no question. Is it worth pursuing this exercise with the credit taxonomy? Just indicate yes or no, please, in the participant box.
Mark, I think, you know, as is typical in the world of ontologies, and I'll say that with the caveat that as sort of an outsider's impression, I mean, there's a number of different ontologies for credit, and credit was sort of an early one, but ISO has one to some extent. DataCite has one. I mean, I did some work with DataCite trying to cross these things up, or crosswalk these things. So I think, is this worth pursuing with the credit ontology is a different question than is this worth pursuing?
Oh yeah, I'm being specific though.
Okay.
And yeah, we've started looking at the ISO a little bit as well, but we haven't gotten very far with it. Most people haven't voted. But I'm seeing a roughly equal mix of yeses and nos.
Where does that vote happen?
Your question?
My question is this exercise worth pursuing, continuing, or is it worth continuing to pursue this exercise with the credit taxonomy? The way
credit
to vote
taxonomy alone.
The credit taxonomy alone. And if you click on participants in your Zoom bar, you'll see all the list of participants, and you can click a yes or a no. And we have 1 minute left, so we'll need to wrap up. I think my takeaways are going to be definitions really matter. Credit is not necessarily applicable to other artifacts. There's much work to be done. I would be interested in finding out more about TED's mapping across credit taxonomies.
I think I sent it to this group, but I'll send it to you, Mark.
Okay.
Mark, can I had my hand up? Can I just make a really quick comment?
Yeah.
The reason I vote for pursuing this for credit specifically is that a very large number of publishers are in fact or have adopted credit. The big evil empire just announced 125 journals using credit. So I don't care what sort of terrible you think it is. There's a great force in implementation. And as an AGU journal editor, I gave a talk at the EGU Data Help Desk about we're doing credit. Credit's not well described for data, for software, and for something else. And I made a plea for communities, and now I'm talking specifically to one of them, to take a look at credit specifically for that use case around what publishers are implementing and do the next sensible thing and not go off and boil the ocean. Those were the words I used, but do something that's actually really useful next step that I know that the journal or the publishers, not the journals, but the publishers will actually go and implement because they have traction and they have told me that they will update the taxonomy in the door for the greater discussion around credit and potentially other representations. But whether we like it or not, the publishers have adopted credit for now.
Yeah, that's largely why we started with it. But I'm not sure I get your point. The publishers don't publish data sets, don't publish software, don't publish, I mean, sort of they do, but let's not go there. But
no, Mark, it's about the credit roles in identification and association with manuscripts. It's not got to do with the publishers. The publishers are just implementing a place on their submission systems and their publication systems where you hover, I sent you the link, remember, you hover over a person's name and up pops the roles that they played. And there's badging and all these other things that contribute to the open science ecosystem. So that's sort of the axe that I'm trying to wield right now. And the axe is currently populated with credit. Again, for better or for worse, but it's the game, it's the formalism they're using. Is that?
Yeah. Hey, Peter, I think Dan made a good point in the chat that credit makes sense for publishers since it was written and conceived really for papers.
Yep.
And publishers think mostly of papers. So I agree completely that in the world of published papers, credit is a pretty big step forward. But then when you have on the x-axis, you have bins of research objects as you go to data sets or instruments or these other things, that applicability may change and may peak for papers.
I totally agree, Ted. And so what I'm looking for is I'm looking for a projection from the multidimensional space down to the publisher or the manuscript axis. And if you guys could do that, because frankly, ESIP's the best game in town at the moment on this. There's a few other groups. I think Dan maybe can comment if Force 11 is looking at this, but I'm looking to ESIP for some robust, let me just say again, projection down onto the manuscript axis from this multidimensional space.
all right, we're out of time, unfortunately. So this credit thing, I mean, the biggest takeaway is this is complicated. So I would encourage you all to join the cluster. The cluster will try and digest this probably in our August meeting. We meet on the third Thursday of the month, I think at 10 o'clock Mountain, noon Eastern. And so the next step of the cluster will be to digest all of this and figure out where we want to go next.
Mark,
yeah.
Can I ask a question when we have everyone here?
Yeah.
Before we wrap up?
Yeah.
Would it be worth, can I rephrase your question that you had asked everybody to vote on? Would it be worth people's time if ESIP, as a cluster in ESIP, we not only pick roles from credit, but if there are roles that are defined elsewhere, we create a matrix of some sort that says, okay, here are the roles that apply to these research objects using credit, but here are ones that also apply using other defined roles, whether it be, ISO or anyone else.
I mean, I think just because of time, it seems like this is a discussion that's going to happen in the cluster.
I know, just that like the group, since we have people not in the cluster,
Yeah, I think discussing it in the cluster and allocating names of roles to different research objects would be a worthwhile thing.
Yeah. So in this, for folks on the call, today, forward us if you can't attend the cluster. If you have a list of roles.
And I think maybe as we go forward, rather than trying to look at multiple objects, we might want to pick one, see how we can, data is our favorite, probably one of my favorite. And, we started to make some progress with credit, but then, we know there's the ISO rules, there's other rules. Maybe we can come up with the new credit taxonomy for data that borrows extensively from existing things.
I had a question for Pierre while he's here. I pointed to the credit ontology that's being developed as part of OBO. Are you familiar with that? I think it was being done at the Northwestern Library or Northwestern University Library or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've seen it pop up in the OBO sphere, but I mean, I think I just put it in the chat too. I don't know the team. It could be just a few people. It could be just a grad student looking at things, right? So it could be something else, but I don't think we should look externally for that. This group has a unique combination of people who can reality check a lot of those and say, this works, this doesn't, as also Heather pointed out, and Peter too. So I think that idea of coming up with the matrix in this cluster and pushing it towards groups with these ontologies and inspiring the classifications to wake up to new realities, I think that's a role that ESIP can play, because it's really hard to critique that when you have so many voices represented. So yeah, I'm aware of it, but the thing is, I think this cluster's internal expertise should be driving the show. We should of course check that out, but I wouldn't be bound by it. Just because it's an ontology doesn't make it necessarily, very good. That's the content level stuff.
Well, can we quote you on that?
Just to add two comments really quickly. One is that it's an NIH funded project, I believe, and I think the people there are fairly serious and fairly good, but they may have assumptions based on their background of NIH biomedicine work that may not work here. The other thing I was going to say is I don't know if anybody's tried putting in credit roles for a list of like 25 authors for a paper, but it's not fun. And if we're going to now say, instead of the 14 options we have for each of the 25 authors, we really have 100, it's not clear to me if this is actually going to be practical. So I feel like that would also be a good discussion, is how do we, not how do we just get data that we would love to have, but how would we practically actually get it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. And keep in mind, like the OBO resources, they're all open, right? So if ESIP goes and says, we'd like to modify this, according to the principles, they can't necessarily say, no, you can fork it, you can create a new one, that sort of thing. So let's create some creativity and inclusion here for that.
So Dan, this is a great point. It's already come up at AGU. I had a paper with 112 authors, and we encouraged them to do it, and they refused. But if ESIP could come up with a little CSV syntax of a file that could be uploaded, then the publisher, again, Wiley, would be able to ingest that and populate those forms.
Right, and there is, there's things that have been done along those lines for software in terms of citation.cff and CodeMeta and schema.org, right. And maybe we could overload one of those in some way.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Well, thanks again, everyone. This was certainly interesting. It was very productive, but obviously we need to do a lot more work. So like I say, join the cluster, and we'll keep poking away at this. Credit is harder than reproducibility, it would seem.
I do have a question, and it's actually a question for everybody, especially those who are also in the semantics group. It seems to me the semantics group was very interested in doing this and trying to, come up with real recommendations for our, what are the leading practices in this.